Maria Santos hasn't slept properly in 3 months. Every night, she stares at her phone, scrolling through news alerts about immigration raids, deportation orders, and families torn apart at airport gates. Her husband Carlos, a construction worker in Los Angeles, holds a green card that suddenly feels as fragile as tissue paper. Their 3 American-born children ask questions she cannot answer. Mummy, are we safe? What makes Maria's story particularly heartbreaking is that she represents just one face among 4.2 million Filipino Americans whose lives have been turned upside down by legislation that most people don't even know exists. The 2025 Immigration Enforcement and National Security Act didn't make headlines like a celebrity scandal or a natural disaster, but its impact threatens to reshape the very fabric of one of America's largest and most established immigrant communities. If you're curious about the stories that mainstream media overlooks, stories that affect millions of real people, then hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because today we're diving deep into a crisis that's unfolding in slow motion across American suburbs and Filipino neighborhoods. The timing of this legislation reveals something deeply troubling about American immigration policy. Just as Filipino families thought they'd found stability after decades of contributing to American society, new rules have emerged that specifically target the pathways they've relied upon for generations. The Filipino-American community, which has quietly built churches, opened businesses, staffed hospitals, and raised American citizens for over a century, suddenly finds itself in the crosshairs of policies that seem designed to dismantle their traditional family reunification strategies. What's particularly insidious about these changes is how they've been packaged as merit-based reform and national security measures, language that sounds reasonable until you understand the devastating human cost hidden beneath the bureaucratic terminology. Carlos Santos arrived in America 18 years ago through a family petition filed by his older brother, a nurse who had established permanent residency in the 1990s. This pathway, known as the F4 visa category for siblings of U.S. citizens, has been the backbone of Filipino immigration for decades. The waiting time was already lengthy, sometimes stretching over 20 years, but families accepted the delay because they knew the process worked. Filipino culture places enormous value on family unity, with extended families often pooling resources to support one member's journey to America, understanding that success would eventually benefit everyone. The 2025 legislation has effectively eliminated this pathway by capping F4 visas at an impossibly low number and introducing income requirements that make sponsorship nearly impossible for working-class families. The cruel mathematics are simple. If you're a Filipino factory worker or restaurant employee trying to bring your sibling to America, you now need to earn 3 times the federal poverty level, maintain that income for consecutive years, and navigate a system that has become actively hostile to your success. The ripple effects extend far beyond individual families into the very institutions that have relied on Filipino talent for decades. American hospitals, nursing homes, and healthcare facilities have depended heavily on Filipino medical professionals, many of whom arrived through family sponsorship and later brought their relatives through the same system. Dr. Elena Rodriguez, chief of nursing at a Chicago medical center, estimates that 40% of her nursing staff trace their immigration story back to family reunification programs. These aren't economic migrants seeking better opportunities. They're skilled professionals filling critical shortages in American healthcare, education, and essential services. The new legislation threatens to choke off this pipeline just as America faces severe shortages in healthcare workers, creating a perfect storm of policy stupidity that benefits absolutely no one. Hospital administrators across the country are quietly panicking about staffing shortages that could materialize over the next few years as Filipino families, facing impossible bureaucratic hurdles, begin looking toward Canada, Australia, and other countries with more sensible immigration policies. The most heartbreaking aspect of these changes involves families that are already deep into the petition process. Rosa Martinez filed paperwork to bring her elderly mother from the Philippines to California in 2019, paying thousands in legal fees and completing mountains of documentation. Her mother, now 78 years old and in declining health, has been waiting patiently for her visa interview, selling the family home in Manila and preparing for a new life in America. The new legislation has retroactively changed the requirements for her case, demanding additional financial guarantees that Rosa, a single mother working 2 jobs, simply cannot meet. The psychological torture of raising someone's hopes for years before snatching away their dreams at the final moment reveals the casual cruelty embedded in these policy changes. Rosa's mother isn't just losing the chance to live near her grandchildren, she's losing her final opportunity to experience life in the country her daughter calls home, watching from across the Pacific as age and isolation close their window for reunion forever. The economic implications of blocking Filipino immigration extend far beyond individual tragedies into broader questions about American competitiveness and demographic sustainability. Filipino Americans have one of the highest rates of home ownership among immigrant groups, start businesses at above-average rates, and send their children to college at levels that exceed the national average. They're not draining public resources, they're contributing to economic growth in measurable, significant ways. The Congressional Budget Office estimates that every Filipino family that successfully immigrates contributes approximately $180,000 more in taxes over their lifetime than they consume in public services. Blocking these families doesn't protect American workers or preserve resources, it eliminates future taxpayers, entrepreneurs, and community leaders whose absence will be felt for decades. The states with the largest Filipino populations, California, Hawaii, Illinois, and Texas, have already begun calculating the economic impact of reduced Filipino immigration, and the numbers suggest a massive transfer of human capital to countries that welcome what America is rejecting. Before we continue, don't forget to hit subscribe and turn on notifications so you never miss an update on stories that matter. Let's get back to the hidden crisis that's reshaping immigrant communities across America. The new legislation employs a particularly sophisticated form of discrimination that avoids obvious racial profiling while achieving similar results. Rather than explicitly targeting Filipino families, the rules create procedural obstacles that disproportionately affect immigration patterns specific to Filipino culture and economic circumstances. For example, the requirement for continuous employment verification penalizes families where multiple generations work together in small businesses, a common Filipino economic strategy. The expanded background checks now include extended family members, creating impossible documentation requirements for families whose relatives may have lived through political upheavals in the Philippines. The cumulative effect of these seemingly neutral requirements is to systematically exclude Filipino families while maintaining plausible deniability about discriminatory intent. Legal scholars studying the legislation have identified at least 12 provisions that, while facially neutral, create barriers that map almost perfectly onto Filipino immigration patterns, suggesting a level of targeted precision that cannot be accidental. The psychological warfare embedded in these policies extends beyond legal technicalities into the realm of cultural destruction. Filipino families operate on principles of mutual obligation and collective responsibility that span generations and continents. Children grown up understanding that their success in America carries the responsibility to help parents, siblings, and extended family achieve similar opportunities. This cultural value system has produced some of America's most dedicated immigrants, people who work multiple jobs, sacrifice personal comfort, and delay their own dreams to fulfill family obligations. The new legislation deliberately targets this cultural strength, transforming it into a legal liability. Successful Filipino Americans now face an impossible choice: abandon their cultural values and leave family members behind, or exhaust their resources in legal battles they're increasingly unlikely to win. The emotional toll of this forced cultural assimilation creates psychological damage that extends far beyond the immediate family into Filipino American communities that have built their identity around the principle that success in America should benefit everyone back home. The enforcement mechanisms embedded in the 2025 legislation reveal the true scope of its ambitions to reshape not just future immigration but the status of existing Filipino American families. Immigration and Customs Enforcement has received significantly expanded authority to review previous family petition approvals, creating a climate of retroactive uncertainty that affects families who thought their immigration journey was complete. Green card holders who sponsored family members in the past now find themselves subject to enhanced scrutiny that could jeopardize their own status if any irregularities are discovered in their family's immigration history. This creates a terrifying feedback loop where successful integration and family sponsorship become retrospective risks rather than achievements. The message being sent to Filipino American communities is unmistakable. Your presence in America is conditional, your families are unwelcome, and your previous contributions provide no protection against current political whims. The international implications of America's Filipino immigration restrictions have already begun reshaping global migration patterns in ways that benefit America's economic competitors. Canada has quietly expanded its family reunification programs while streamlining professional recognition for Filipino healthcare workers, creating an attractive alternative for families blocked from American reunification. Australia has introduced specific visa categories targeting Filipino skilled workers and their families, recognizing the economic value that American policies are discarding. The European Union has begun recruiting Filipino professionals for healthcare and technology sectors, offering not just employment but pathways to permanent residency that don't exist in America's increasingly restrictive system. The result is a massive brain drain that redirects Filipino talent away from American institutions toward countries that recognize the value of what America is rejecting. American hospitals competing for Filipino nurses now find themselves bidding against Canadian healthcare systems that can offer not just employment but family reunification prospects that America has eliminated. The most devastating long-term consequence of these policies may be their impact on the next generation of Filipino Americans, children who are learning that their cultural heritage is seen as a liability rather than an asset. Second- and third-generation Filipino Americans report feeling disconnected from family members they may never meet, unable to share American opportunities with relatives who helped make their success possible. This forced cultural amputation creates identity crises that extend far beyond individual families into questions about what it means to be American in a system that punishes family loyalty and cultural continuity. Young Filipino Americans increasingly report feeling unwelcome in their own country, questioning whether America truly values their contributions or merely tolerates their presence. The psychological damage of growing up in a culture that celebrates family values while systematically destroying your family's unity creates cognitive dissonance that no amount of individual success can resolve. The legal challenges to these immigration restrictions have revealed the sophisticated constitutional manipulation embedded in the 2025 legislation. Rather than creating obvious violations of equal protection or due process rights, the law operates through administrative complexity and bureaucratic discretion that makes constitutional challenges nearly impossible to sustain. Immigration courts, already overwhelmed and understaffed, face impossible caseloads that guarantee delays measuring in years rather than months. The practical result is that even families with strong legal cases find themselves trapped in procedural purgatory where justice delayed becomes justice denied. Filipino legal organizations report that winning individual cases has become less important than surviving the process, as legal fees and emotional exhaustion force many families to abandon legitimate claims. The system has been designed not to adjudicate immigration cases fairly but to discourage immigration applications entirely, using procedural torture as a tool of policy enforcement. The economic ripple effects of restricted Filipino immigration are already visible in sectors that have historically depended on Filipino talent and work ethic. Healthcare facilities report nursing shortages that cannot be filled domestically, as American nursing schools produce insufficient graduates to meet demand. Technology companies that have relied on Filipino engineers and programmers face talent gaps that domestic recruitment cannot address. The agricultural and service sectors, heavily dependent on Filipino workers who often transition from family reunification to business ownership, report labor shortages that threaten productivity and economic growth. The irony is that America is creating exactly the economic problems that immigration advocates have warned about for decades: labor shortages, skill gaps, and demographic imbalances that immigration could solve if political hysteria didn't override economic logic. The human cost of these policies extends beyond statistics into individual stories that reveal the moral bankruptcy of using families as political weapons. Children who have never met their grandparents because visa delays consumed their elderly years. Parents who cannot attend their children's weddings or graduations because travel restrictions make reunion impossible. Elderly Filipinos who die alone in the Philippines while their American children and grandchildren watch helplessly from across the Pacific. These aren't abstract policy outcomes. They're real human tragedies multiplied across thousands of families whose only crime was believing in American promises about family reunification and earned citizenship. The psychological trauma inflicted on these families cannot be measured in economic terms, but it will resonate through generations of Filipino Americans who learn that their government views their family bonds as threats rather than strengths. If you've made it this far, you're clearly someone who values understanding the real stories behind policy headlines, so why not make it official? Hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications so you never miss our deep dives. The future implications of America's anti-Filipino immigration policies extend far beyond the immediate community into broader questions about American identity and global competitiveness. As other developed nations compete for Filipino talent with more welcoming policies and genuine family reunification opportunities, America risks losing not just individual immigrants but entire networks of professional and cultural connections that have strengthened American society for over a century. The message being sent to the global Filipino diaspora is that America no longer values what they offer, creating reputation damage that will persist long after specific policies change. In an increasingly competitive global economy where talent mobility determines national success, America's decision to reject one of the world's most successful immigrant communities represents a strategic blunder of historic proportions. The consequences of this policy stupidity will be measured not just in economic terms but in America's diminished capacity to attract and retain the global talent that has always been the foundation of American prosperity and innovation. The 2025 Immigration Enforcement and National Security Act may succeed in reducing Filipino immigration, but its ultimate achievement will be America's transformation from a land of opportunity into just another country that fears its own diversity.